Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to our Day 11 coverage of the 2021 Iditarod on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and many, many other places, as well as on dogworksradio.com. And tonight I am joined by my co-hosts, Tony Ryder calling in from Kenai, Alaska, and Alex Stein calling in from Southern California. Tony, how's it going tonight?
Not too bad. It's sunny and starting to feel like spring out there.
Yep, snow is melting up here as we speak, and it's going to be a great spring, I think. And Alex, how is it going down there in California?
It's going really well, and I just have to thank everyone who's been listening and reaching out to us on social media and writing to us. I was very happy and pleasantly surprised that I got a couple of public and a bunch of private messages from people who had listened to the show we did last night and were really thankful that we were highlighting Will and that we were talking about representation in the Iditarod. And, we talk a lot about this as a race and we talk a lot about what various people are running for, but there is something so powerful about people being able to see people who look like them or share their experience, whether it's being a different nationality or ethnicity or sexuality or being trans or whatever. And that's a very, very powerful thing that I think can really have lasting repercussions when the race is long, long gone.
Hear, hear. Thanks for sharing that, Alex. So we have 32 mushers into the finish, and we have, it looks like, 4 mushers remaining, and those guys are all in Skwetna, I believe. Larry Doherty, Will Trashinsky, Victoria Hardwick, and Dakota Schlossler. Do you have any quick updates on any of those guys, Tony?
Well, Will and I think Larry are both really, really close to the finish. They're going to finish while we're recording this tonight, actually. Though Larry's GPS, which glitched out in McGrath halfway through the race, has now apparently decided to stop pinging tonight. So I don't actually know where he is in relation to the finish. But Will should be right there in the next probably 15 or 20 minutes. And then our race for the Red Lantern, they just passed Yentna Station. So they might be coming in before or right around midnight, depending on how fast they can run this last leg.
Excellent. And for folks that remember, going the other way, Yentna Station is the first checkpoint. And if I'm not mistaken, Alex, they did not have that as an official checkpoint this year. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And I believe it's about 40 miles, 35 miles, somewhere in that neighborhood.
And for folks that may have listened to the show, the patriarch of Yentna Station, Dan Gaberzak, passed away just shortly before the race. And anybody that's been up that way, whether it's on snow machine or dog team or fat bike or whatever, has probably had their run-ins with what they call Riverman Dan. And he was a heck of a character. And of course, we want to give him and his family, of course, he's passed away, but his family a shout out, and our thoughts go out to them. I know that they had a celebration of life for him at the beginning of Iditarod, and I know, Alex, you've had a chance to meet him. Tony, have you ever been out to Yentna?
I have not. I have sadly not adventured much in that part of Alaska. especially in the wintertime.
So. Well, you're going to have to come down here to the restart and then at least take a snow machine trail or something up that way and see that side of the trail, because it's an entirely different look than it is in Nome. Isn't that right, Alex?
Yeah, it's really kind of cool, and it's an old-fashioned lodge, and people just come in and they set their dogs out outside, and it's a real family kind of situation, and the people who are checkers and volunteers there all seem to have been doing it for a very long time, and then rope their kids into doing it as well.
Speaking of Yentna Station, while we're thinking about it, and boy, we're just going to cover a lot tonight like we did last night, it's my understanding that your new book, Alex, Tales from the Trail, which came out in between last year's Iditarod and this, has a picture on the cover of Yentna Station. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a picture I took just as the sun was going down, and it was just beautiful and incredibly blue, and 6 or 7 mushers wrote to me and said, "Is that my dog team on the cover?" and it's not. And I think I will break some news here and reveal that although you can't see her in the picture, the dog team that you see on the cover is Blair Braverman's.
Excellent. And that was the year before last when you and I rode up there with our friend Miranda on the snow machines. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. What a trip that was. You were still
a little bumpy.
Yeah. You were still recovering from your shoulder injury, and it was a long 35 miles that day, but I'm glad you were able to get out there and spend some time at Yentna, and I think we had a good time there, and you got to meet Dan and the whole crew there, as well as seeing those teams come into the first checkpoint. It's always a cool thought. So let's do something real quick, Alex. Go ahead and plug that book. How do people find it? And tell us the name of it again and what it's about.
So the book is Tales from the Trail, short fiction about dogs, mushing, and sled dog races. And it is a collection of short pieces of fiction from the point of view of dogs, mushers, fans, and other things and places and people. And it is available at Amazon.com as a paperback, ebook, and now as an audiobook as well.
Excellent. And we also have it available on our show notes page over at dogworksradio.com. There's a little link right there with a picture of the book that you can buy it right through Amazon. So check that out as well. And let's jump into some stories. We have a whole bunch of them. The first one, Alex, we're going to talk a little bit about the speed of the race. A few days ago, we were talking about, is this a faster or slower race? And I understand you have an answer for us.
Yeah, so I did what I like to do, which is to retreat into numbers. Although, ironically, I'm bad at math, so go figure. But we noticed that Dallas, who is who's the first team coming in this year, had an average speed of 4.57 miles per hour, and that's, of course, including everything. That's including all of the rests and all of that. And I had said that I thought that the normal speed was closer to 5. It turns out that's not right. Let's put it that way. Last year, Thomas Werner, the fastest team, had a speed of 4.29 miles per hour. Of course, it's a longer course, so it's a little bit harder to compare. But the average speed was definitely faster this year than last year. In contrast, the fastest Iditarod, let me say that again. The fastest Iditarod that went all the way to Nome was in 2017 when Mitch Seavey won in 8 days, 3 hours, and some change. And his average speed then was 4.93 miles per hour. So he was definitely faster. Took a little bit longer because the course was 120 or 130 miles longer. So yes, this race is fast compared to the average races that we've seen in the past 10 years, but it's not the fastest. So it's definitely been a quick race.
It has, and we spoke about this the other day. Remember, that is a dead-in-the-middle average, because you'll often see dog teams just barreling out of the trail, out of a checkpoint at, maybe 10 or 12 miles an hour with the brakes on and the drags and all that. And then, of course, you have not only the rests where they are stopped, but also many parts of the trail, this year in particular, when they were going up literal mountain faces where they were going just a mile or two an hour. So that's a pretty good average. But to split hairs a little bit, we're really talking about a half a mile an hour either way between these races and the fastest race that Alex talked about. So Tony, I know that we talked briefly before air about some of our other stories. What do you have for us tonight?
Well, I'd like to talk about the buffalo picture that Dan Caduce, I hope I say his last name right. I should know his last name pronunciation, but I just call him Mr. Jody Bailey, so I kind of forget what his name is. He apparently, after he got off the trail, shared a photo from, I assume, the burn, where his dog team encountered several buffalo in the trail. And it's nice being in the digital age with social media, because we're actually seeing these encounters more than just hearing about them. And it kind of helps give you an idea of what it actually looks like. Because when I hear, hey, there was a moose in the trail or there was a buffalo in the trail, I immediately go to the worst possible scenario. And I don't know if that's just because I grew up here and I know better than to want to tangle with those animals. But it's just this really cool picture. The Anchorage Daily News used it in one of their articles talking about the different animal encounters that mushers have experienced this year. And it's these, I think there's 2 or 3 buffalo in the actual trail. You're not going down that trail until they move. And it's Dan's dogs, and they're all very excited. They're very interested in what's down the trail, but he was able to keep them stopped long enough to take a series of pictures. So it's another reminder that yes, this trail was fast. Yes, it was well groomed, but there were still those typical Iditarod stories of, like the one we shared last night of Jeff and Jesse trying to get rid of the moose out on the trail, and buffalo. And I don't actually know how you get a buffalo to move. I know normally you annoy the moose and it goes away. I've never actually heard of the buffalo actually being such a problem on Iditarod or any dog sled race. So I don't know how. I guess you just wait, because those guys are big.
Yeah, they are big. And there's a portion of the trail right there through the burn area, as they call it, called the Buffalo Tunnels. And that's exactly what they are talking about. Alex, if memory serves me, I believe you told the story about the buffalo a few years ago. Do you remember that story about how those guys got there? Because buffalo are not native to that part of the country at all. Do you remember that?
Yeah, apparently there were some buffalo who were brought to Alaska from Montana about 100 years or so ago, and they have just sort of thrived in that area. It's interesting too, because the ADN story was talking about how Dan was trying to get the buffalo out of the way, and he got out his axe and he was trying to make lots of noise, and they weren't having any of it. They weren't moving. So he cut down part of a tree, and they were still there and they weren't moving. So he threw the section of the tree that he had cut down at the buffalo. And that finally got them to back up a little bit. But it was you go 10 yards and then you're encountered a buffalo again for quite a while.
Wow. Yeah.
Do you think that tree is the one that Hal ended up being assaulted by? He said a tree came out of nowhere and attacked him. Maybe, I mean, I'd have to go back and look and see where Hal was in relation to Dan, but.
Interesting. So, Alex, you have another story for us about Ryan Olson and Paige Drobny, and we have not spoken about it this year, about the perils of sleep deprivation. We talked a little bit about folks falling off the sled and whatnot, but that's a topic for a different day. But it's my understanding that these two ladies were having quite the conversation, and one of them didn't even know quite where they were.
Yeah, so this was, I saw this today on the Squid Acres Facebook page, and apparently Paige said at the end, at the finish line, that she'd been camping with Ryan Olson, and they're very close friends, and this was the night before she finished, and the alarm went off early in the morning, and Paige said, I just want to sleep in. It's cold. I haven't slept in a while. Let's just go home. And Ryan said, Paige, we have to finish the race. And Paige said, what do you mean? We're in a race? And Ryan said, yes, we're in a race. And Paige said, well, what race are we doing? And Ryan said, we're doing the Iditarod. And Paige said, really? Okay. And then they got off.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say 8 days into the Iditarod, when you're getting, maybe if you're lucky, a couple hours of sleep per night, these sort of things tend to happen, and people are a little bit disoriented. In Nome, I think it might have been you, Tony, who was talking about in Nome that after they finish, mushers sort of walk around sort of like zombies, and they're always turning around thinking that another team is coming up upon them.
Oh yeah. They're waiting. Normally if they're wandering around, they're waiting for someone to come in. But you talk to them and they're just spaced. It's like when you have, your little niece or nephew or whatever, and they're telling you that they're not tired, and then 2 seconds later they fall over and they're just out. I'm always waiting to just one day come across a musher in the street just asleep, and there'd be no waking them up.
Yeah. Hey, guys, speaking of these later checkpoints, especially at the back of the Packers, what is the deal this year with this banana bread?
Oh.
So in Squentna, there is a group of volunteers. They call themselves the Squentna Sweeties, and they are known for their hospitality. And this year, even though it's a little bit different, they have not stopped being their sweet selves. And they have their little cabin set up. And apparently they were baking banana bread yesterday. And several mushers, I think Travis Fields was actually a half an hour late getting out of the final checkpoint after his mandatory 8, because they were baking banana bread as he was getting ready to leave, and he was not going to leave until he got some fresh baked bread. So I can't say for sure that it's the best banana bread ever, but I would assume after a week or 10 days out on the trail, anything fresh made that wasn't just boiled in a dog food cooker has got to be the best thing you've ever eaten in your life. So I can't fault Travis or any of the other teams for wanting to stick around and partake in some of that hospitality.
Speaking of
and the mushers who are finishing are all talking about food at their interviews. Not all of them, but a lot of them are talking about food when they're interviewed, and they're talking about, I want to go and get a cheeseburger. I want to go and do this. I want to. One of the mushers, I think it was Suzanne Tuminelli, said that she had promised her dogs that they were just going to go home, watch a movie, and eat all the food.
Yeah.
And I guess Hal Hansen, he told his brother and sister-in-law as they were driving him home that he wanted pancakes and milk. So, I mean, food is the first thing I think on their mind other than sleep.
Yeah, and when they didn't have all that hospitality like in a normal year, I would imagine some of that good food that they receive in a lot of those checkpoints, Tacotna and McGrath and the pizzas in Unalakleet and on down the line, that was not happening this year. So it's interesting to hear those stories. Tony, you had mentioned Travis Beals sticking around and waiting for this banana bread. At the time, he was somewhere around 25th place. At least that's where he finished. And that leads us into our next topic, which is about prize money and the awards, Alex, because once you're out of that money spot, there's no reason why you should hurry, because everybody gets that same amount, the $1,049 prize or token gift or whatever it's called, finisher's gift. But otherwise, unless you're in one of those top spots, you don't get paid out, do you?
Right, and they divide the purse, which is usually it's announced right about now how much it will be, or if it has been announced, I haven't seen it. Where they'll announce what the total prize pool is, and then they'll make the determinations for how much that is for first through, I believe, 20th place is considered in the money. Everyone else gets $1,049 if they finish.
Yeah, and we've talked about it in our coverage, how it's probably considerably bit lower than it has been in years past. I remember back in the old days where it was a heck of a lot of money for that first place prize, and of course that new truck or at least Dodge, whether it's a truck or a car or a Jeep or whatever, which I still find interesting that did not happen this year, and I would love to find out why. We know that the sponsor dropped out earlier this year, but I wonder if that they didn't try to seek that out somewhere else. Because speaking of prizes and awards, and maybe we can cover awards tomorrow since we're running short on time, that same Dodge dealer would also raffle off 2 or 3 trucks during the year, especially at the state fair. It was a big deal to go to the Iditarod tent and buy a ticket. What are they, $50 or $100, Tony?
They're $100. We when they did they used to do the merchandise table in the headquarters. It was volunteer run. Now it's run by the same group that works out at the Wasilla headquarters. But volunteers would sell them at the table, and then your name was also entered in a smaller raffle. If you sold the winning ticket, then you also got a prize.
So evidently they're not doing that either. And I think that was a big fundraiser for Iditarod, because I remember so many people talking on Facebook and friends and, just in general would say, hey, we went to the booth at the fair and we got 2 or 3 truck raffle tickets. And I guess that's not happening. So I guess
they are doing the raffle. It's just a money prize instead of all of the extras. And I think that's just because with COVID, you don't know because you didn't just win a truck, you could win other prizes as well.
Yep.
And I think, and a lot of those were like trips and stuff, which with COVID, we don't know what's actually happening this summer. So I think it was just easier to make it a money prize.
Now, is that lottery that they were talking about? Was that this year or last year as well?
Last year, I think, had the lottery thing where you put in your guess on who was going to win or whatever. But this one they're calling a raffle.
Okay, very good. So yeah, we'll cover the awards tomorrow. We'll run through them quickly. We've talked about a lot of them, the first to McGrath and the halfway point and all of that. And one musher in particular claimed a lot of those. So we'll get through that list pretty dang quick tomorrow night and what all those awards mean and all of that as we're moving forward. So Alex, don't let us forget that. Alex, what else do we have before we talk about our musher profile?
I think, how are we doing on time?
We're over, but that's okay.
Okay. In that case, I think we should go to the musher profile.
Okay, let's do it. Who are we talking about?
So tonight's musher profile is Josh McNeal, and he finished in between when we were on last night and now, he is 26 years old, was born and raised in Washington State in the foothills of Mount St. Helens, which is just a beautiful area. He was always obsessed with doing things outdoors, and when he was growing up, he participated in football, wrestling, track, and baseball. He spent his summers, at least his early summers, working on local farms, hauling hay and cutting firewood. And then one year, he had a chance meeting with the owners of an Alaskan fishing lodge at the Portland Boat Show. And that led to him convincing his parents to let him start spending his summers as a fishing guide in Alaska, starting when he was 16. And he said that the original draw of Alaska was going up for the adventure, and he started working on the Kenai Peninsula, and he'd fly up for the summer and work on this fishing lodge on the Kenai River, and then fly back a couple of days before football practice started at high school. His high school football coach said that Josh is the sort of person you can imagine doing anything. He said, if Josh became president, it wouldn't surprise me. If he decided he was going to climb Mount Everest, I'd be like, yeah, I can see Josh doing that. He's one of these kids who just does whatever he sets his mind to. The day after he graduated from high school, he moved full-time to Alaska and studied petroleum engineering at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, graduated in 2017. And he said that his sophomore year, he started ski joring, which is like cross-country skiing, but with a dog or dogs attached to you. And he really enjoyed doing that and decided that he wanted to start hooking dogs up to a sled and start mushing. He started recreationally mushing, and then during his senior year, he started working as a handler at the kennel of Iditarod Musher and veteran Ken Anderson. And he was helping Ken train for his, I believe, 17th and final Iditarod, and that's when he really got hooked on long runs and mushing in general. In the spring of 2018, Ken Anderson decided he was going to retire from dog sledding, and McNeal basically bought out Ken's kennel and bought a house in Kasilof at the base of the Caribou Hills, and that's when he started his own kennel, which he calls Crooked Creek Kennel. In March of 2020, so about a year ago, he packed up everything, moved outside Fairbanks to the hills of Esther with his wife Joby, and they have 39 Alaskan Huskies. Josh works as a supervisor on the North Slope oil fields for one of the companies there, and that's kind of a 2 weeks on, 24 hours a day, and then 2 weeks off situation. So he said that when he's out in the oil fields, he has his wife and his handler who are sort of keeping up the training and running the dogs. And he said, and this is interesting to me, it reminded me of Dallas Seavey, who I believe was a high school wrestler. He said there's a lot of people in high school and college who wrestled who then became mushers because it's a very mentally and physically taxing sport, and you get extremely tired and sleep deprived, and you have to do a lot of work on the trail and overcome a lot of obstacles. In December 2019, he was down in Idaho racing in the Idaho Dog Sled Challenge, and he stopped his team because there was some garbage that was on the trail, and he decided that it was up to him to clean this up and make the trail look nice, and he set both of his snow hooks and figured he'd be fine, but he forgot that there's a general rule that you never walk behind your sled because your team could take off and you could lose them. And he went past the trash, went back to pick it up. His team pulled forward, pulled out the snow hooks, and he took off at a dead sprint and had to jump to get back on his sled and tore one of his hamstrings. And his team then proceeded to drag him down a mountain for 2 miles. And after he got everything sort of straightened up and straightened away, he then had to continue for the next 20 miles until he got to a checkpoint with a torn hamstring. His first year racing his team, he ran non-competitively a few years back in the Tustamina 200 and the Kobach 440. Last winter, they went to the lower 48 and raced in the Idaho Sled Dog Challenge and the UP 200. And Josh said, mushing has just added to the adventure of getting to see all of these amazing, beautiful places with some of my best friends. And he's gotten to see incredible sights around Alaska, some great northern lights, and just bond with his dogs. He told the Insider that he doesn't like to drink coffee on the trail, but he's been taking a lot of caffeine pills to help him stay awake. Because he has mostly been running towards the back, or actually like the middle to the back. There were a lot of teams that were passing him when he was still on his way out to Iditarod. And he said that there were 25 head-on passes as he was going towards Iditarod.
Wow.
And he said it was just awesome to see his dogs conquer the steps at night. And he is planning on returning to Iditarod, but probably won't be back next year. He said he's making plans to come back strong in 2023. He said he and his kennel are in it for the long haul. He has a lot of younger dogs, including 17 he thinks are going to be real superstar sled dogs. And at Skwetna, he revealed that his boss, whom he works for out there on the oil fields, started a betting pool. And people would put in $20 to guess which checkpoint he would scratch at, because a lot of rookies scratch. But the deal was, if he finishes, he gets all of the money. So he said to the Insider in Skwetna, he said, "Get the money ready, Bill," even though it's probably only going to be enough to pay for a couple of days worth of dog food for his kennels. His dogs are Jenna, who's a leader who he refers to as the Kennel Princess, Hoagie, who's one of his main leaders, who he says loves stealing snacks from sled bags after a run, Brownie, who's another leader who is wild and goes nuts when she sees a harness, and he usually has to put her on the gang line first because she gets so excited. Suka, who is small but filled with drive and intelligence. Carlos, who is goofy, incredibly goofy, and a future big-time Iditarod leader. Yos, who is a very happy swing dog, and Josh described him as an absolute powerhouse. Apollo, who's 2 years old and wasn't going to be on the team and then made the team just a couple weeks before the start. Kiska, who is also 2, who is a little bit clumsy, but has learned a lot on the trail this year and is always ready to run. Hydra, who's a great team dog, who's the cheerleader of the team and always barks as they're running. Brownie, who's another wheel dog. Poseidon, who's a yearling. And the dogs that he dropped this year were Mara, who was a leader, Quick Draw, who was one of the who was one of the Iditarod and Yukon Quest finishers on his team, Aphrodite, who's also a yearling, and Athena, who is mom to 4 of their new puppies. And Josh described her as one of the most athletic and up-and-coming dogs that he has. He finished in 28th place, which is a very, very good finish, in 9 days, 16 hours, and 7 minutes. And I think that he is someone who, presuming he's able to come back and run regularly, both in Iditarod and in other races, I think he's going to be a real force to be reckoned with in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. As you were talking, and I would love to get Tony's perspective on this. As you were talking, you said that Josh bought a place down in Kasilov and ended up chasing the snow and moving north, which is what happens to a lot of mushers. And we talked about this briefly in our coverage the other day about people going up to the Denali Highway. And Tony, I know that's your stomping grounds down there. You're in Kenai, and for many years, way back to some of the earliest days of the Iditarod, that was sort of a hotbed. We have down there Tim and Dean Osmar. We have Mitch Seavey. We had Josh here. We had my friend Dave Shear, who was based out of Kasilof. And Monica Zappa is down there, and I believe Libby Riddles lives down in the Homer area. That was a big hotbed back in the day. Can you describe that area a little bit? There's not a lot of snow like there used to be, at least until you get up into the hills. But the only one really left are the Osmars, Monica, and Mitch on the peninsula. Everybody else has either gotten out of mushing or moved away. And one other one is a friend of mine, James Wheeler, who's more into sprint mushing now. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you also forgot Paul Gebhardt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we forgot about Paul. Yes.
Don't forget about Paul. He's the one that came to all the schools to talk about mushing. So, Kasilof, it's really the Kasilof and the Nilchik area that we talk about when we're talking about the Tustamina 200. We talked about that the other day, and something about how the Caribou Hills are not actually hills, but mountains, according to a certain musher who was talking about them the other night.
Yep, that's me.
Named Robert. But in this area, there's a lot of river crossings, and then it is very hilly or mountainous for our lower 48 listeners, especially, because what y'all call mountains down there, we call hills up here. No judgment. But in the Caribou Hills area, it is not that I know much about the Dalzell Gorge and the Happy River Steps, but it kind of simulates that. And a lot of mushers did come down here for the Tustamina 200 to get those miles in of going up and back down and up again. Originally, they would start off from Kasilof and go into the hills, go down to Homer, turn around, come back. Now they're running basically from the top of the Caribou Hills down to Homer, back into the Caribou Hills, and then they go around on the different trails in the Caribou Hills to get up to that 200 miles and then come back into the finish. Between bad weather years that we've had down here, the Kenai Peninsula is very coastal, even though we're not like what you're used to in the Iditarod with the West Coast. We're right on the Cook Inlet, and then in Homer you have Kachemak Bay. So we have a lot of coastal like storms. So either we have a very snowy winter or we have a very wet, frozen rain winter. Back when I was growing up, it was more snow, less rain. Now it seems to go the other way, and now we have more rainy years than snowy years. That being said, this year would have been perfect for all of this. I feel like Josh left and the snow came back. So it's a warmer climate. It's very south central, so it's kind of like up there in Willow, only warmer and wetter. So it was one of kind of this little growing hotbed. I know that Dan Seavey wrote in his autobiography that when he first came up, it really wasn't a whole lot of action going on. Most of the dog mushing was in the Anchorage area, but Anchorage wasn't a really big, bustling city back in the 60s. So dog mushing and dog races were able to kind of happen a little bit easier than it is now that it's a full-on city. But yeah, the Osmars, in fact, were the ones that started the Tustamina 200, and it was because Dean wanted his son to be able to qualify for Iditarod, and there were not enough races in their area to get him qualified. So they came up with one, and it was basically they set up a race course, and they had a keg of beer. It was a very, very old school. If you romanticize dog mushing and their races, it was very old school like that. And it It ran for 30 years before they finally basically disbanded. I hear that they're trying to bring it back for maybe next year, but haven't heard anything since last fall.
And that climate change aspect of it, we're going to talk a little bit about tomorrow on what we think about the future of the sport. And I think that comes into play with that. One more point with that, Tony, I know we're running over, but this is good stuff. We had mentioned that Mitch and his family still live down there. Do they, obviously they're there because of their work that they do on the glacier, but do they do a lot of training down there still, or do they head north?
This year, Hal, I think, did a lot of training in the Sterling area, which is where Mitch's quote-unquote winter kennel is based out of. That's where his family settled when they moved back up from Virginia. They do all of their summer tours in Seward. They have their glacier tour in Girdwood, but their home base is in Sterling. But they also go up to I think they were in Talkeetna and wherever Dallas is training quite a bit. And then they also go up to Denali, especially in the really low snow years down here. I think last year we just had ice all the way through, and I don't think they ever really cut a full trail down in Sterling. So.
Yeah, and just a little perspective, when people say that they're going up for a training run from someplace like Sterling to the Denali Highway, that's about, what is it, about 400 miles or so drive from that area?
I don't know about miles, but it's like 10 to 12 hours if the roads are good.
Yeah.
and I've never driven it driving a dog truck and trailers, so I don't actually know how long it takes. Yeah, it's for a dog team.
It's a long drive to get those training miles in, but that's what's happening in these days of training for Iditarod. And I know Alex and I have talked a lot about full-time mushers on this show, about mushers that have the ability to not have to work during training and or racing for Iditarod, and then of course those folks that still hold down full-time jobs and all of that, and just the big difference between the two mushing styles of those athletes. It's an entirely different lifestyle almost. Those folks that have to get up and go to work every morning versus others that work either seasonal jobs like construction or whatever. Fishermen is a big career for a lot of mushers, and then have the ability to do only dog training and racing in the winter. So, Alex, we are way over. Is there anything else before we close?
Yeah, just while we were taping this, Larry Doherty finished at 7:35 in 33rd place, and Will Trzynski finished at 7:57 in 34th place. So Will has finished his first Iditarod, and that does make him the first openly trans person to finish Iditarod. So it's just a tremendous accomplishment, as it is for all of these mushers. And congratulations.
Yeah, and speaking of Larry Doherty, we've had him on the show, I believe, 3 times, and you can find those episodes over on dogworksradio.com, and just type Larry Doherty in the search box. I know, Alex, you were part of at least 2 of those, and that guy, what an interview. He has some great stories. I remember he telling us about his trip to Africa with his son when they went to Kilimanjaro. This guy is he's something else, isn't he?
He really is, and his day job is he's an oncologist, so he works with people who are very sick, people who have cancer, and he's just one of these guys who wants to make the world a better place, wants to help people, and also wants to just go and have fun and live life to the fullest. And he climbs mountains and he races Iditarod, and it's just and he's a wonderful, smart, funny guy. So it's always a big privilege to get to talk to him.
Full circle, Tony, is he with one of the CVs for this race?
He typically borrows a team from Mitch Seavey, and this year he borrowed the B team from Mitch's kennel, which Gearhart has been running all year for his qualifying, but Larry got to run it in the Iditarod this year. So, yep, Lost Boy Larry's come a long way.
Excellent.
Yeah, and he finished with 11 dogs, so that's a very good amount to finish when you're running a B team.
Yep.
And training up these future Iditarod stars.
And the B team guys, that's probably some of the superstars of next year's team or the year after. Whereas that puppy team, which Hal was running, is even more of an up-and-comer. They are kind of the third string if you think about sports. So it really plays out, and these bigger kennels with these several mushers definitely have a plan in it, and that's a whole nother show in itself, and a great strategy to think about in terms of long-term mushing for sure. All right, guys, thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of my co-host tonight, Tony Ryder and Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Dogworks Radio. We will see you guys tomorrow night. It will be our wrap-up show. It will be one you will not want to miss, because you will not hear the three of us together until potentially next year. So we're thinking about that, but definitely stay tuned, and maybe we'll have an announcement or two tomorrow. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.